Well, welcome everyone. It is right at 1 p.m. So we're going to kick off and admit people as they're able. I just want to welcome you all and thank you for coming today. We're so happy to have you here for our first in a series of presentations designed specifically for you, students and teachers of Recruiting Washington teachers programs around the state. So a couple of things, just logistics I'm going to share before we get started. They'll also be in the chat. So I mentioned that we are recording the presentation for those who are unable to attend. If you have your camera on, your video will not be recorded. So don't worry about that. If you unmute yourself to ask a question or make a comment, your voice will be in the recording. So I just wanted everyone to be aware. We really strongly encourage participation. I know our presenter prefers a conversation to a one-way presentation. So as the presentation proceeds, if you have a question or comment, you can let us know in a variety of ways. You can use the raise hand feature in Zoom, which I'm sure you're all familiar with by this stage of the pandemic. You can turn your camera on and raise your actual hand and we will look for you and we'll write that down and we'll try to call on you. And you can also choose to type question or comment in the chat. And one of us will call on you when there's a pause in the presentation. So if you have a question, you can just simply type question and we'll note that you have one. So just those are some logistics we have. And I think, Erica, we can go ahead and get started. So I should probably introduce Erica, but I'm going to let her introduce herself. So today, Dr. Erica Hernandez-Scott has agreed generously to share her time and thoughts and experience with all of us. And she has compelled us all to join by teaching us how to become a JEDI educator.
I'm the DEI Leadership and Learning Manager at the Professional Educator Standards Board. I was in another life. I was an urban student, then an urban teacher, then an urban teacher educator. So it was, I went from being the kid in an urban school to preparing teachers who wanted to go back and work in urban schools. Right now, what I do is I am responsible for looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion in the things that we do inside our agency and our initiatives that we have that relate to the public and how teachers are prepared. And so I think that's enough. I can just tell you that I'm always thinking about what happens at schools and I'm always looking and trying to figure out, is there another way? Is there a better way? So we'll jump into it. We're going to have a land acknowledgement, a moment of silence, and then we're going to start talking about some things that usually happen in schools and other ways we might do them. And as we go on, I'm going to ask you to tell me, well, what are some typical things that you see in schools? And let's think together about other ways that we can imagine them. Because change seems like a really big, difficult thing, but it really starts one person, one behavior at a time. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
We would like to start our meeting today recognizing the Indigenous people who have historically been moved from their homelands and territories. The United States seized more than 1.5 billion acres from Indigenous people between 1776 and 1887, but today, most of that land is held in trust by the government, severely restricting the rights of Native American people. It is important to note that on this map, we do not see the Duwamish, Wanapum, and Chinook tribes who are not recognized by the US federal government, but should be acknowledged as they have had a long history in present-day Washington. Recognizing the original inhabitants of the spaces we occupy through awareness building and land acknowledgement practices is an important step toward advancing equity in education and beyond. Wherever you are virtually today in Washington state, please take a few moments to acknowledge the land that you are on as the traditional homeland of the Indigenous peoples.
So a quick brief introduction. My name is Zoe Hammes-Hefty. I work with Stacy and Erica at PESB. I work for the Paraeducator Board. And so I'm just going to read a moment of silence. We would like to acknowledge the history of this nation, one fraught with contradictions. For too long, this country has elevated a story of democracy and freedom while minimizing the impact of violence and oppression on marginalized communities on whose backs this nation was built. Today, members of our Black community and other communities of color continue to experience racism through police brutality, mass incarceration, inequitable education and health services, deportation, and other forms of subjugation. We aim to disrupt this legacy of systemic racism by centering racial equity and justice in our work. This is how we stand with our communities of color. So before we begin today, we just want to offer a moment of silence to consider these words and how you might join us in this work.
So I'm your presenter today. This is what you should have seen as the little promo for what we want to do. We want to talk about how teachers use everyday practices to support justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And like, what are those little things that make a good teacher or great teacher different from a good teacher, or a good teacher different from a bad teacher? And those come down to really small choices. So, for example, we had a land acknowledgement, we had a moment of silence. And in our agency, we make sure that we are having regular conversations and reflection about how do we make sure that we're doing more than just talk about justice. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how do we do this? How does a regular old person who lives in an apartment in Olympia in the state of Washington decide that she's going to be an advocate for students, that she's going to be a JEDI educator? I'm going to give us some small examples of what that might look like today. And then I want you to give us some small examples of other ways that we continue to shape and change education for yourselves and for future generations of students that come after you. So I want to start with a little just definition, background building. One of the things that I have discovered a lot over the past year is that if people are talking to each other and they don't have a shared understanding of what the words mean, you can think you're getting somewhere and you won't. So for today, um, this is what I mean by equity: the guarantee of fair treatment, access, opportunity, advancement for all students, educators, while identifying and eliminating barriers that prevent full participation of some groups. What do we know? We know the world is not fair. If you are a Black, brown, a poor white student, a student with special needs, a student learning English, you don't get the same treatment out in the world as other people do. You don't have advantages in life. That doesn't mean that you can't be strong and powerful and overcome that inequity. But we are in pursuit of equity. And that means that we are creating conditions in which we are making things fair. And sometimes that means that we have to treat people differently in order to achieve fairness for each of them. Then we have diversity. So a person is unique. Diversity is what we're talking about when we have a bunch of unique people get together and you start to notice their differences. So we have individual differences like personality, prior knowledge. What's your life experience? Are you from a rural community? I'm from an urban community, but I'm from an urban community. If you can see behind me, I'm from an urban community in Kansas City. I'm from the Midwest. You can hear that I'm different than you by the words that I choose to use. Then you have group and social differences: race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexual orientation, what country you're from, um, your ability, and then you get into culture. So my family is from Mexico. I was born in Kansas City. We're not the same as Mexicans from Arizona, and Mexicans are not the same as Puerto Ricans, as Cubans, as Colombians. And then we have different political views, different religious views, and then other forms of difference. Whenever you have different groups of people together, you have diversity. So saying that you have a room full of Mexicans, my family, if we're all together, we don't necessarily represent diversity, because in race, as far as ethnicity is concerned, we're all the same. So diversity is when you bring lots of different people together. Sometimes people think diversity means anything but white, and that's not true. Diversity is about bringing difference together. And then the last term that I want to talk about is inclusion, active, intentional, ongoing engagement with diversity that cultivates empathy and belonging while increasing awareness, content knowledge, cognitive sophistication. So cognitive has to do with your brain and learning. So it means that you learn more, you have better thinking and understanding. So if an environment is really inclusive, it has different people coming together that understand each other, that can know what it's like to be in another person's shoes, and you actually use those differences as benefits. You become smarter because you're around people who are different than you. So it's hard to have inclusion if everyone is the same. And just because you have different groups of people together doesn't mean that you have inclusion if you're not actively trying to work together. So these are big ideas and they tend to be really hard for people to do. And if you think about where you want to be at the end, like a just society at the end in a world that's, full of a lot of conflict, you might think, oh, we could never get there. But actually, really great teachers do small things every day that create justice inside the four walls of their classroom or inside their virtual environments. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what does each of these look like in a classroom. And we have to imagine what it's like to be back inside the four walls of a classroom. So let's talk about equity. We said equity had to do with fairness. When I was a classroom student, here's some things that I experienced. If you missed an assignment or if you got them all wrong, you got a 0 on an assignment. So that means if I had 2 assignments and I got a 0 on one and I got 100% on the other, if I average them together, I get 50%. That means that even though my second assignment says I know how to do it, I still get an F. Does that seem fair? Is it fair that because you didn't understand something at the beginning, that it counts against you later on if your grades are averaged? That somehow doesn't seem fair. If you run a marathon or if you run track, for those of you who are in sports, does anyone care what your slowest time is? Or were they really looking to see how fast can you make your fastest time? It's kind of like that. We want to be able to, if we're talking about equity in grading, we want to be able to use your best scores to help you figure out how well you're doing. You'll notice things like the ACT, sometimes the ACT and the SAT will say, well, we'll take the best score for your grade. That's equity. So if you have a teacher that's saying, I don't want grades to harm students, what they can do is they can say, you get to redo this assignment, you missed it, you got to redo it. And I'm going to give you full credit because I want you to show me what you know. I'm not going to punish you because you forgot the assignment. Now, I still might chew you out and say, hey, I need you to get things on time. And you still got to redo this assignment because I want grades to reflect what you actually know. If you get a C in a class, that C could mean you were late too many times. That C could mean you got some zeros. That C could mean your handwriting was bad. It could mean anything. So instead of using letter grades that hide whether or not you can actually do the work, I made sure all of my students did all of their assignments to the point where they're like, please don't make me do this again. Yes, you're going to do it again. You're being punished by having to show me how much you know. You get to redo the assignment, you get full credit. If you earn an A, you get an A. and everyone will know what that means. When you average grades, you don't want that to count against you. So you report the most competent performance. I don't know about the rest of you, but when I started teaching long division, the students always cried at the beginning. They're like, oh, it's so hard. There's so many steps. Well, of course it's hard. So why would I count their learning at the beginning of my teaching as evidence of what they can do? I'm like, okay, I'll start grading what you do in division in a week after you've had lots of practice. I don't want that practice to count against you. I'll report what you can do after you've had some time and some instruction, and maybe even give some students a little more teaching than others. So before we go on, I'd like to know if you have any experiences with any of these examples that I just talked about. Like, has anything like this happened to you? Or do you have another example of equity in the classroom that where like you have this experience, you're like, this seems unfair, and that maybe we can think about what's another way to do it?
I can read a comment from the chat while we
Sure.
have the wait time. So it sounds like this makes so much more sense than the system all of us grew up with. Getting graded sometimes seems unfair depending on the teacher.
Right. That brings up an interesting point. What do you notice about grading across different teachers?
The comments already spoke to this. 2 of our English teachers have the impact of the assignments increase the further in the semester once it shows more skills.
Okay, so 2 of the English teachers, that's some good teaching. I never saw that my whole time in P12 school. It was it was sometimes where you're like, I hope I don't get this teacher. I'm so excited I got that teacher. And we didn't know that it's sometimes reflected, someone was hard because of what the equity in their grading practices, and somebody else was preferable because they let you revise and resubmit without being punished.
A couple more comments from the chat. First, I would like to apologize. I think the first comment was from, I believe the name is Danavin. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I want to read Casey's comment, which is, seriously, I never thought about this, but it's not fair for teachers to bring grades down when people are practicing. And Sam mentions that when someone gets to sit in the front of the class and not be stuck behind other kids when really they have a hard time seeing. It's happened with my older brother, and I would see that as an equity issue in the classroom.
Absolutely. So both points are both ideas are great. One, sometimes you hear people say practice makes perfect, right? Have you ever heard that phrase, practice makes perfect? Practice makes permanent. So if students are practicing something over and over again, and they have not gotten enough feedback, right? Like they keep trying something over and over again, they don't get it. All they're doing is reinforcing the idea that they're doing it wrong. So sometimes if you try something and it doesn't work, then you need an intervention. Like, look, I keep getting this wrong. Can you show me another way? Can you give me another example? Can you meet with me after school so when I try it again, I stop doing it wrong? I don't want to practice and build this habit of getting it wrong. And we don't want not knowing, like that makes people afraid to take risk, right? If they think, oh, if I show that I don't know it all immediately, it's going to work against me. That, and it is an equity issue of where you get to sit in the classroom. I don't know about you, but you could sometimes watch people and they have like the same pattern that they move in the room. They might go put a hand on one kid's shoulder for encouragement. Somebody else in the back needs that encouragement too, but maybe they don't get it because they never sit in the front, or they get to class late because the previous class is too far. Where you sit, if you can see, matters. I didn't even know that I needed glasses until I started college, because I ended up in a classroom where I had to sit so far in the back. I'm like, I can't see. I wonder how many years I needed glasses before I realized that was an issue of equity. Anything else before we move on to the next idea?
I'd just like to 3 additional comments. So there's a comment from Davina, I think essentially about weighted work. So English teachers also have the essays and writing worth more than the daily practice work. Savannah mentions that in her experience, most math teachers give you the work and then say, learn it. And when you ask for help, they act like it's easy. Brianna also mentions that a challenge with having an A in class and then getting a lower score, which brings the grade down, and wonders why shouldn't my good score push my grades up? That would help so many people struggling if we were able to change that.
And that has to do with averaging grades, right? Whether a performance brings you up or down, then you start wondering, should we be averaging them at all? And what would society do if we just were like, no more letter grades? people would that would be hard for people because they mean something, right? But then the danger of that is that grades make, sometimes people will only do something for a grade. They're like, oh, this isn't for a grade, this isn't for points. How many points is this for? I'm not going to do it. And then you're like, oh, but I just wanted you to try something. I wanted you to be curious. So sometimes too many points, too much grading can actually lead to inequity, because it makes people not want to do it at all, or they will only do it unless they think they're going to get something for it. And so then you're building bad habits when you want people to be curious and try things on their own and take risks. So yes, go ahead.
I just want to mention one final comment, and I'm paraphrasing this. It's from Sherelle, and it really speaks to the difference in treatment between students of color and white students. And so praise versus maybe making students feel like they're not good or smart enough. So comment about that.
Absolutely. You can, so when I was teaching teachers, I would ask them to imagine you're going in your classroom, you're going to give a test. Can you look at the kids in the room and say, I know exactly who's going to do really well. I know exactly who's going to not do well. And I know all the kids in the middle, right? Before I even give this test, I know pretty much how kids are going to do. And they're like, yeah, I can see that. And I'm like, well, if you know who's at the middle and who's at the bottom, why aren't you doing something about it? And they're like, oh. So equity is about changing the game. It's about saying, I recognize these unfair patterns and I'm going to do something about it. And I said, oh, okay, there's 5 kids. I know right now they're going to fail this test. So I need to have some after school time with them. I need to have folks working with small groups, and I'm going to go spend time with that group. I'm going to disrupt the patterns that keep the inequity in place. So that's a little bit about equity. Now let's talk about diversity. We're talking about difference, bringing difference together. It's Black History Month. And almost for years and years and years, Black History Month, this is up through high school and into college. I had teachers teaching me Rosa Parks was tired the day she sat on the bus and refused to give up her seat. That's the story that people tell about diversity. She was just a lady who got tired. They leave out the parts where Rosa Parks was a trained activist. She went to school to learn how to be a part of a resistance movement. That day, she didn't give up. She planned for that to happen. She knew all the stuff that was going to happen after that. And there were other women who tried it before her, who did not get acknowledged for that because they didn't think they were respectable. So the first person who tried it, I believe, is Claudette Colvin. She was a young Black woman and she had a baby out of wedlock. And they're like, oh, people won't respect her, so we can't use her story. But then Rosa Parks comes along and they're like, oh, she looks good in the paper, right? People will say she's a good woman, so we'll use her story instead. But then people left out this part where, like, they were being trained to do this. These were smart people, a part of the movement, not just people who got tired. And so I think that diminishes the story about her. We're not getting a full picture of that diversity. The other piece that I learned well into my adulthood was to stop talking about Black people in history as slaves. They were enslaved Africans. They came from Africa. Enslavement was a condition that was oppressed, oppression that they experienced. So they were not inherently slaves. That's not their name. That's not the kind of person they are. So when talking about diversity, the specific words we use matter. A slave, if you call someone a slave, it tells you this story that that person had no control. They had no choice. They had no ability to resist. But then when you start talking about how these were Africans that experienced enslavement, and then you also get these additional stories of diversity about their resistance, about call and response, about the ways in which people tried to change that system as opposed to just taking it. Then we have a fuller picture of the diversity that's a part of our history. Have any of you experienced these not quite accurate representations of diversity in school? And do you have any other examples that you'd like to share? And I saw a hand a few minutes ago, a hand and a camera come on.
Yes, that was Casey. And Casey, if you'd like to speak, I'd like to give you a chance to do that before we move forward.
No, my computer's just bugging. I didn't mean to do that.
Oh, well, thanks, Casey.
So I'll read a couple of comments from the chat, if that's okay, while other folks consider raising their hand. There are definitely multiple comments about not knowing this information and feeling upset and sad that we aren't getting it. More history that which I'm assuming some teachers, refuse to teach or tell. Davina mentions, as a teacher, I'm frustrated with our education system. I didn't actually know that more whole truth of Rosa Parks's background until last year. And Brianna does not like how the history we learn actually, are always whitewashed to downplay how awful America can be. There's a new comment. I'm trying to pre-read these before I read them aloud. So many pictures from protesting and things like that were edited to be black and white to make it look like it was really much longer ago than when it really was.
Mm-hmm. So what would imagine, and so this is a social condition, right? So this is happening to all of us. And there isn't necessarily one individual who's responsible for us not having an accurate representation of history, of the diversity of our country. But let's say you go and you become a teacher and you decide, I want to teach the real deal. I want to give students the real information. What might that mean we have to do? If we say, well, I'm going to be a JEDI educator, I'm going to do this thing, what do I have to do that might be different from the rest of the teachers in my hallway or in my building or in my program?
I just two things, if I can interject. Sherelle would like to make a comment, I believe, and then Kiara just mentioned also that the bias history we have been taught in school has made me lose interest in the subject because as a Black student, I never learned about my history.
Who was it who wanted to speak? And then I'll come back about that. I want to come back to that, lose interest in the history.
Yes, I believe it's Sherelle. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Would you like to share?
Yeah, I was gonna add to that what you were saying, because like in the school system, when it comes to like the Black kids or any kids of color, when we have white teachers, doesn't matter like which um like math, history, anything of that, like my experience, like I had a science teacher in middle school, and it still happens in school still. So it's just like she would I will all the Black kids will be in the back of the class, and all the white kids will always sit in the front of the class, and it was so weird. And so one day I had asked her a question because we were doing a test, so everyone was doing a test, and she said if nobody passes, like your grade will drop to an E or anything. And so I passed the test, and some of my friends that are like Black in color, like we kind of passed the test, like to like a C level and everything, but she still failed us. And we try to compromise, like, why? Can you show us how we did wrong? And she's like, no, they passed, you guys didn't. You guys did bad. And then I had to go to the office one time, and I had to tell the principals and everything. They don't believe us. Like when the Black kids tell principals, or they'll tell a different staff and they'll tell the principal, but the principal, they won't ever listen or hear out what they have to say. They'll always like be on the teacher side, especially if it's a white male or female teacher and it's a Black student telling the principal what they're doing. They won't like really acknowledge, oh, that's the fact that I'm doing, or this and that. And so it's kind of hard when you're a Black student and you have a white teacher that doesn't really understand, or nor like just comes at you out of nowhere. And it happens in a lot of schools. So yeah.
Well, Sherelle, let me tell you that that story is, many people have that experience, but what I appreciate about you sharing that story is that you, every time you all speak up, it makes it possible for those of us who have influence in the system to act on your behalf, right? So we're in the process of looking at standards for cultural competence, and that means, what do we want all of our teachers to understand about diversity in the classroom? Do our teachers understand how seating impacts whether or not students feel like they belong, or whether or not you respect them, or whether or not you get another chance at something? So every time you speak up, that becomes a piece of information that we use to say, this is how teacher preparation should be better. This is what we could do instead, right? So you are being an advocate for students like yourself. And now those of us who work at the standards board can take this idea and help wrap policy around producing changes for you. And then when you decide to become a teacher and go into the classroom, you can operate differently and talk to your colleagues and fellow teachers about what else they can do. Right? Because when I remember when I was preparing a teacher, I went into a science classroom and all the Black kids were sitting in the back two rows. And I was watching my student, teach from the front, and he was teaching a great lesson. And then afterward, I was like, that was a really great lesson. Let's talk about this seating. And he's like, well, what about the seating? I'm like, well, I'm noticing you haven't, all the black kids are sitting in the back. Did you do that on purpose? And he's like, oh, I didn't even notice it. And I'm like, well, what are we going to do about it? Right? So any problem that is not acknowledged, any problem that we can't imagine another way, doesn't get solved. So what would happen if you were like, hey, could we try seating in a different way? Could we move the chairs into groups? Could we do this or we do that? And it's really interesting that you brought this up, Sherelle, because that's actually one of the things that we're going to talk about in the next slide. That has to do with seating and where you sit and how that matters. But one other point I'll make. I know that in the grand scheme of things, when we're looking at difference, especially difference across race, that there is a challenge with teachers teaching children and youth that are different than themselves well. When you come from a different culture, a different place, it's hard to figure out how to connect. Which is one of the reasons why we have interest in diversifying the workforce, because we know that the more alike you are, the easier it is to connect. But I had some good white teachers who understood my culture. So I know sometimes people feel like there's nothing we can do about it because we're just different. No, that's actually not true. We can expect more from everyone, but if you don't know what you don't know, then you don't fix it. So part of what we have to do is figure out, how do we help more adults have these conversations so that you, Sherelle, aren't the one trying to explain to the principal what the problem is. If a teacher with a challenge has a colleague that's like, hey, I noticed this, maybe try this instead, then that takes the burden off you, because it's not fair to ask you to help fix grown folks' problems when grown folks are the ones that need to do that. But we do need you to tell us so that we can help advocate for you when you're not in a position to do it for yourself.
Can I add something to that too?
Sure.
So it's like, and he also used like a racial slur, like the N word one time,
Mm.
and
And
we
I
we
would say when that's something like that happens, it's a very good time to get your family and your administrator involved.
all the students try to go to the school and tell them they don't believe us. They let her stay there, and yeah.
Hmm. Well, that is one. I'm sorry that happened to you. That gives me, that puts a fire inside me around what can I do from the position that I'm in so that you don't have to experience that. And I also think that this is a conversation that you can continue to have with your teachers after this, after today, right?
Yeah, because it was two of them at the school too. It was two of them that said that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's never okay. So that's definitely, but that's also a problem that adults need to help you with. That's not something that you'd be able to fix by yourself. But when you start bringing groups of people together and plan, just like Rosa Parks made, that she looked like one person deciding not to stand up on that particular day, but she was part of a larger movement. And sometimes when you have individuals that are problems, you have to have a larger movement that becomes too hard to ignore. Thank you, Sherelle. Stacy, do we have anything else in the chat before we move forward?
We have so many things in the chat, and I put this in there, and I'm going to try to get to everything. But I also, Sherelle, appreciate your willingness to speak up, not only in the classroom but in this presentation. And there was a comment from about 15 minutes ago from Metzley, I think is the correct pronunciation, that speaks to a little bit of what you were saying. I feel like it's not always the teachers. You could have a principal who doesn't put students of color as a priority and allows the white kids to do as they please. And there are many other comments some interesting comments here about learning more from social media about race and history than is learned in many classrooms, needing to update history books and give them accurate information. Some agreement that this type of treatment hasn't happened to the student personally, but have heard similar things from friends at school. And I will continue reading and see what I've missed and be prepared for the next pause.
And I think one of the things that is for educators, right? So one of the things that we realize, like, it's human nature when something is hard and something happens that you don't like, you avoid it. Like somebody doesn't do a good job of teaching accurate history, so then you don't like history, or somebody is really smart at math but not good at explaining it to other people, so then you don't like math and you don't feel good at math. But when you choose to become an educator, the thing that no one told me was that the thing that's hard, the thing that you don't like to do, the thing that maybe sometimes doesn't make you feel good, that's actually the thing you have to spend more time with. So if you're like, I didn't like history because my teachers weren't good at teaching history, now I got to read more history books, because guess what? I have to go to the students and be enthusiastic about history. If I don't like math, then I'm going to give that attitude towards math to other people. So I actually have to, kind of like the firefighter runs into the building, we have to be the Jedis that go towards the things that are hard. And the last thing that we're going to talk about today is, like, if you decide to do that hard work, how do you keep it from wearing out? So that'll be the last thing that we talk about today, is like, if I want to do this, right, and I want to be brave and bold and an educator activist, how do I keep hope alive? How do I keep from, like, just throwing in the towel? We'll talk about some strategies that we can use with that as well. So we'll move on to our last one, which Sherelle brought up, seating, right? So if we're in a classroom that is inclusive, if we're looking for inclusion in a classroom, feeling like we belong, if you see all the Black kids sitting in one place, all the white kids sitting in one place, all the athletes in one place, you know, all the same cliques that you have in high school, right? All the little groups of people. I was one of the, I thought I was a cool nerd, but I think I just was a nerd, maybe. I'm not sure. I think I'm still holding on to that. I'm a cool nerd vibe that I got going on. But if in the classroom you see that the seating looks just like it does in the cafeteria, then chances are it's not inclusive. So what can you do instead? Ask kids to sit in teams and then move them. Move them. Sometimes you sit in different groups, different times during the class, different days, different, you might change up once a quarter. When I was teaching older high school students and adults, they go, oh, I put my stuff down, this is my seat. I'm like, don't get used to it, because in half an hour you're going to move, and then half an hour of that you're going to move again. So you don't actually get to own a place, because I'm going to keep moving you, because every time you move you get to talk to somebody new. And when you talk to new people and you have different interactions over time, you're not going to like everybody, but you at least get to know them well enough to not, like, hate everyone, right? And if you want people to come together across difference, they got to get to know each other. And that starts with being really deliberate about where people can sit. The other thing that happens, and somebody mentioned earlier, like, oh, the same people sit in the front. I bet those same people are the ones that answer questions in class. I bet the same ones that get called on or decide to speak out. I bet there are kids at school right now who never hear another person say their name out loud all day long. They could spend a whole day of school and no one would say, oh, hey, Erica, if there was no opportunity to do that. So what do you do to make sure everyone gets a chance to talk? What do you do to make sure everyone gets to try to answer a question, even if it's wrong? If you ask a question And then you make everyone talk in a small group first. Like, if you have a wrong answer, if you're like, this thought, I don't know, I'm not sure. You can hear for 3 other people before you formulate a thought. And then you could randomly pick someone to share out, right? Like, you don't know who's going to get called on, but let's say you're like, I didn't do the reading last night. So they asked a question, I don't know what the answer is, but the teacher asked a question, a small group talks, and now you're like, whew, now I've got something I can share because I heard what the other people had to say. The point of coming to class is to make sure that everyone participates, not to punish them for not being perfect. So everyone gets a chance to talk. Everyone has a chance to move. You spend time with different people so that you don't ignore them if, someone needs help. That's how you make people feel like they belong together, by making them be together in different ways. But you don't make them stay that way, because just like family, anybody you spend a long time around, you get sick of. So you're like, oh, I'm tired of you. I sit next to you every class. Well, if you get moved around a lot, then you don't have a chance to get sick of a person and then create toxic relationships. You just like always moving and greeting and getting to know people, which is what you want to do when you're an adolescent anyway. You just want to like hang out and make new friends and talk. What experiences do you have with inclusion in the classroom and getting to know your friends? And tell me something.
I kind of feel like the kid in class who's talking too much since I'm reading all the comments. There was a comment a few moments ago about a math class with new seats that were randomly assigned every day. So students had a chance to sit with different people and in a different spot. I'm going to read this one. I haven't proofed it yet. I remember in middle school, I had a science teacher who let us sit wherever we wanted every day in class. All the popular kids, in quotes, sat up front with each other. They were very favored by the teacher and they got called on most and loved the class and seating, but other kids in the class didn't have equal opportunity to succeed. As a kid, it seems cool to be able to sit by your friends, but we didn't have much equity in that class.
Right. So this is an amazing point about equity. What do we know? We know that our society experiences racism, and we know that we have different groups of people that are treated unfairly based on differences that they have. Right? We know that is true. When we don't plan to undo those things, they just keep going. So if you say, sit wherever you want, you're just going to sit with people like yourself and avoid people that are different. So you don't learn to be inclusive of other people unless someone helps guide you that way. Not giving the guidance as an educator means we just keep things as they are, because it's human nature to just reproduce the same behaviors that you have over and over again. So much of what we do is habit without even thinking. So if you're like, what do I do then? I make a schedule for myself. I'm going to move these seats every week. I'm going to move these seats once a quarter. I'm going to make sure we talk in 3 different groups each time. Why? Because I'm flawed. Because I have bad habits that I've developed from society, and I don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over again. So I'm going to try something new. And it's not, so a huge piece of this is about deciding to do something different for yourself. I want kids to feel like they belong, so I'm going to let them talk to each other. I want my grading to be fair, so I'm going to let kids redo assignments. I want diversity to flourish, so I'm going to learn about race and ethnicity across every content area. There is Black history in science. There is Latinx history in math. There's like, if I want to know those things, I can find them if I just do the work. And guess what? It's much easier to do that work with other people. It's easier if you divide it up. Like, all right, we want to make our math curriculum more inclusive. How do we do that? Let's form a team and get to work. So much of this, I learned these things from other teachers, from watching them, from reading books, from watching video, from failing myself. Like I honestly believe no one goes into education thinking, I want to ruin kids' lives today. I would like to make people's ruin futures, keep society as it is. Like nobody does that. It's just that they don't know any better. So we have to start thinking about why are things the way they are? And what are some better approaches that lean us towards justice, equity, diversity, inclusion? What's the one move I can make today that might be different? I saw a flash in the chat. Did someone have something to say?
There are multiple new comments. Would you like me to highlight a few?
Yes.
So I just want to acknowledge to everyone. I and Erica and all of your teachers I see, we're also appreciative of your engagement, and I'm doing my best to read everyone's comments, and I'm confident that I will have missed one. So please, I apologize for that. One teacher did point out that it's important to know that some students do have IEP or 504 plans, and that impacts where they're required to sit.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple of students with conversations about their own experience in sitting. Destiny says in certain classes, they sat people who had the bad reputation furthest away from the front and wouldn't let them share or talk out loud. Just because their reputation outside of class wasn't the greatest doesn't mean they act the same way in class. Venice said that last year I was in a science class and my teacher had us sit with different people every week. And I feel like that was one of the only classes I've ever had that actually felt like a more connected community. And finally, Micah shares that last year, most teachers allowed them to decide where to sit. And I sat with the same people every day. And now looking back, I realized that because we were sitting in the back, we got a different education than the people in the front.
Mm-hmm. So excellent points. One, does it matter where the front of the room is if the teacher's always moving around? So if you put students in groups, right? Like, where's the front of the room? Does it matter? Because I'm going to come around the back and sit with you. They're like, oh, now we can't play around in the back. No, you sure can't, because I'm back here with you. So the other thing is like this whole idea of where the front of the room is doesn't matter if you're not in the same place all the time. Like I'm putting some miles on my shoes by moving around the classroom, by going and sitting with students. I remember when I was teaching fourth grade students being shocked, like, oh, she came and sit in a chair with us. Yes, because I don't need to stand above you all the time. I can sit here and have a conversation with you. And that I didn't think that was a big deal, but they thought it was, because somehow it was on their level by sitting in the seats with them or moving around the room. And like, that's a classroom management situation. It's called proximity. Like, are you going to be spitting pieces of paper at somebody if you know I'm going to be back around there in the next 90 seconds? You don't have the time. It's hard to do. It's hard to misbehave if you never know where the teacher's going to be. So that's some other pieces of it. And absolutely, you can have a different education inside the same classroom. And what I want you to know as you know, developing adolescents and hopefully future teachers, is that it can be different if you want it to be. And let's see. So the last piece, because we're coming down to the wire, is like, if you decide, right? And I hope you do. Now, I know not everyone wants to be a teacher. If you don't like children and youth, if like they annoy you, don't choose this career, because you got to care for them even if you don't like them. You have to care for them. But if you decide like, I could be a teacher, I could do that. How do I do this work so that I don't quit and fail? Here's some things that have kept me in the education profession for the last 20 something years. Know that burnout can happen to anybody. Sometimes I hear people say, well, I'm passionate. If you have passion, then that doesn't matter. That's not true. Anything can wear you down. So you have to expect it and plan for it. Like, I am a good person. I care about this. Racism, injustice, inequity, those things are hard. They make you sad. They're upsetting. How do I plan for it? How do I expect it? I got to build a supportive network. I got to have friends in the fight with me. They might not be in my building. They might not be right next door. They might be people on social media. They might be family, but you got to have other people who get it. We've been on this webinar today. There's besides myself, there are 82 other people here in this room. Each one of them could be someone that's in your network. I'm on this webinar. I'm now in your network. If you decide you want to teach, you can email me in the future when you're like, I got a problem. Can you think with me? Absolutely. That's what people do when you build networks near and far. You got to be reflective and keep learning. I wish all these things that I shared with you today, I wish I had known them when I first started my teaching career. I didn't. There's a lot I didn't know. I was young. I was 22. I should not have been in charge of other people's children. I could barely, I didn't even pay my own auto insurance. My parents paid for me my auto insurance while I was pretending to be in charge of other people's kids. I didn't know what I was doing, but I kept learning and I was reflective, which meant if something felt wrong and I'm like, I didn't like that. I wish it wasn't as hard. I wish the kids were happier. I wish their learning was better. I just kept at it. Connect with students and families. I used to do things with kids outside of school, go to a neighborhood restaurant, spend our money in the community, visit with families, go to somebody's after school soccer game. Like, if you want to do something that's hard, you have to find personal ways to connect. And when there were days where I thought, I don't want to do this anymore, something funny, something exciting would happen that was in the life of a student that kept me going. So connecting with students and families is really important. You have to recognize that change is slow. If sometimes people will get fed up and say, we need to stop everything that's bad. Most of the time, things aren't good or bad. We're like on a continuum, and we have to be trying to make things better. If we wanted every person who had a hint of racism to leave the profession, we wouldn't have anyone in the profession. That includes people of color who also breathe in the smog of racism. So change is slow, but I start with what's in front of me, and I prioritize student learning and success. Sometimes I might have to just shut the classroom door and say, I'm going to focus on the kids in front of me right now. And some of those bigger things I will tackle later. I'm going to celebrate every win. So if I have a particular student who's having a tantrum 45 minutes every day, and the next day it's 44 minutes instead of 45, that's a win. 1 minute less. Hooray. That's congratulations. And I would send a note home for that kid. Much better day. 1 minute less of misbehavior. It changes the frame when you're trying to help people grow instead of just judge. Right? We want people to get better, so you have to invest in them and celebrate their wins, even when they might not be doing everything that you want them to. Cultivate your life outside of work. Have a hobby. I'm still working on this. My hobby is work. Like this webinar, I was like super excited about doing it. I'm like, let me get all my baby Yoda Grogu pictures, make this slide deck. So excited because I like the show and it's connected to my life outside of work. And then last thing, haters are always going to hate. There's always going to be somebody that's mad at you for wanting more, that doesn't like the pursuit of justice, that maybe their life is just not good. And so they might not make the right choices. And they might try to get in your way. And that's always going to happen. Like if you're doing good work, the work of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, somebody's not going to like it. And that's okay, because haters going to hate. You just got to figure out if you can live with not everyone liking you. And guess what? That's part of being an adult, is figuring out how to live and be okay when others are not okay. So my hope is that you have been able to find something meaningful in this webinar, a little nugget of something that you could take back and think about. And hopefully I planted a little JEDI seed that would help you join me in this effort of making schools more just, more equitable, more encouraging of diversity and inclusion.
Well, I'm going to jump in here since I know we're over time and folks have to go. I'm not sure if you can stick around for a few moments, Erica, but on that last slide, creating your network, I really think that's what we're all trying to do here. Oh, Allison, how do we get lightsabers? Good question. I'll see if those are allowable in the budget. I was wondering why everyone with their camera on was laughing. But yeah, I think building the supportive network of students and teachers and community members all working toward the same goal. Some of the comments that I was not able to read today that were in the chat offered some pretty horrific experiences that students have had with racism and racist language and lack of accountability. And so I want to thank you all for being here and for sharing those stories and for contributing to the conversation. There's additional comments about the need for diversity in the teacher workforce and the need to work toward that. And that is also what we're all doing here together. So I just wanted to say thank you. And then from a logistics side, as I've been sitting here listening and thinking about next month's webinar and what it will look like, I will send out a survey for teachers to also share with your students so we can take your feedback and incorporate that as we move this conversation forward.
It's regular people, right? I'm just somebody that's older, that's been in this game longer than you. I have a doctorate. I still experience racism. I still experience sexism. I still get down about, the problems in the world. But like you give me hope, right? That we can get together and use each other's energy and experiences to keep moving forward. Because if the people who care about students, if the people who care about students don't stand up for them, who will? Someone's got to do it. Might as well be us.
Well, I want to officially dismiss those of you who have to go to your next Zoom meeting. I'm certain there are many of you. And Erica, if you're willing to stick around in case there are folks who'd like to linger, that would be much appreciated.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone.